There's an old saying among deep woods survivalists: the woods don't change at night, your eyes do. They say exhaustion, darkness, and fear can make branches look like people, and ordinary shadows look like monsters. Most of the time, they're probably right, but sometimes, the shadow is exactly what you think it is. Last November, a woman named Amara set out on a 3-day solo hike through a remote forest valley. By the second night, she was miles from the nearest trail, completely surrounded by silent woods. To block the cold wind, she built a small campfire beside the trunk of a massive old oak tree. The night was clear. A thin crescent moon hung overhead. The fire was the only real source of light, throwing long shadows across the forest floor. Amara sat on a log, sipping hot tea, watching the flames dance against the rough bark behind her. Every movement she made was reflected as a shadow on the tree. She lifted her mug. Her shadow lifted its arm. She lowered it. Her shadow did the same. Then, something caught the corner of her eye. There wasn't just one shadow on the tree. There were two. Standing just behind her own silhouette was the shadow of someone much taller. Thin. Perfectly still. Amara's heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't turn around. She didn't even breathe. She kept staring at the tree. Slowly, she lowered her mug. Her shadow copied the movement. The second shadow didn't move at all. She forced herself to think logically. It's a branch, she thought. The fire is flickering. That's all this is. To prove it, she leaned a few inches to her left. Her shadow shifted. The second one stayed exactly where it was. Then, very slowly, the second shadow raised one arm and rested its hand on the shoulder of her shadow. Every hair on Amara's body stood up. There was no sound behind her, no footsteps, no rustling leaves. If someone had walked across the dry forest floor, she would have heard them. Finally, she grabbed her flashlight, spun around, and aimed the beam into the darkness. Nothing, just empty woods, bare trees, cold air, no one. She slowly turned back toward the oak. The second shadow was gone. Only her own remained. She laughed nervously, convincing herself exhaustion had gotten the better of her. She added more wood to the fire, crawled into her tent, and zipped it shut. But sleep never came. For hours, she listened to the wind brushing against the tent. Then, at exactly 3:40 in the morning, the wind stopped. The forest became completely silent. A few seconds later, she heard something just outside the tent. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like heavy fabric shifting, as if someone were standing inches away, leaning over her. Amara held her breath. Then a voice whispered through the thin wall of the tent. Soft, dry, barely louder than breathing. Move over. A long silence followed. Then, you're standing in my light. Amara didn't answer. She didn't move. She sat frozen in the darkness until the first rays of sunlight crept through the trees. She packed her camp without eating breakfast, without looking behind her, and she left. She still hikes. She still sleeps in the woods. But she never builds another campfire, because fire doesn't keep the darkness away. It gives the darkness something to stand behind.